They say time is a flat circle, that everything we've ever done or will do, we're gonna do over and over and over again. And in ways, they'd be right. I'm still jumping online with my friends midweek to play multiplayer games late into the night, having done so for literally the entirety of my adult life. But while the more things change, the more they stay the same, there's been a palpable void in recent years. And I blame Mattrick. But first, let's set the stage. Let's take it back to the golden era.
This is the tournament for the new millennium. You'll experience the most exciting battle in history. Let's get ready to battle. Feel the intensity when power and technique collide. Crush the competition. A battle beyond your imagination. Let the martial arts madness begin. 2001 is the year we make contact. Welcome to the revolution.
When the magazines and early internet forums began discussing the possibility of Microsoft entering the console race, there was noticeable blowback. Having dominated the home computing space for decades, Microsoft were a global behemoth, the likes of which the world has never seen before or since. And with that level of success comes resentment. People weren't happy that such a colossal behemoth was impeding on their territory, viewing them with hostility rather than optimism. At the time, there were three big names in gaming: Nintendo, Sega, and Sony. And those that were around at this time know that there was a perfect equilibrium there, each offering its own unique approach to the medium. There's a reason 1994 to 2001 is spoken about with such reverence even today, and it's because each respective platform offered the best of what it was good at. Microsoft, on the other hand, were an outsider, and one that potentially couldn't be trusted. Not only were they going through an antitrust lawsuit at the time, but they compounded matters by offering to buy Nintendo outright, something that caused the Nintendo execs to laugh them out of the room. These types of bold plays, when orchestrated well, yield dividends, but the industry is a small place, and one misstep can cause ripples and leave lasting impressions. Microsoft clearly didn't know the industry as well as it thought it did, and to make matters worse, most Japanese developers didn't want to develop for Xbox for fear of invoking the wrath of the mighty Sony. So what did Microsoft do? It bought beloved and legendary studio Rareware outright. To say Nintendo fans were crushed would be the understatement of the century. Forum boards erupted into mass hysteria, not Rare, anyone but Rare. Internet revisionists loved to undersell the impact of Rare. But without Rare, the N64 wouldn't have been anywhere near as successful as it was. 4 out of 10 of the best-selling games for the system were made by them, which is insane when you think about how small of a studio they were, and how many games Nintendo first-party teams make. It's no exaggeration to say that they've made many of my favourite games and that I'm frankly fanatical about them, to the point where I literally have signed Donkey Kong artwork by Kev Bayless I won in an online auction in the very room I record this in. They were a phenomenal studio, and fans have every right to be outraged at Nintendo doing them dirty like that. But as with all things Nintendo, the blame shifted, and Microsoft were right in the crosshairs, with many unwilling to forgive them, even years later. The launch of the Xbox, while record-breaking in the US, was noticeably lacking a lot of Japanese support, and thus Japanese customers. Outside of Tecmo and Sega, it was a rather tepid affair, and this proved to be a long-lasting problem for the Xbox brand. But thankfully, Stone Cold Classic Halo was there to enchant the masses, at least in the Western markets. While Microsoft noticeably fumbled the ball when it decided to focus almost entirely on older gamers with its Duke controller, It quickly rectified it with the S and managed to buy back some good grace with gamers by releasing cult classics like Gun Valkyrie, Panzer Dragoon Orta, and Jet Set Radio Future on the system. Additionally, Microsoft had a Trojan horse in their arsenal in the name of Xbox Live, something so unique and ahead of its time for console gaming that it took the competitors years to catch up. Sure, the Dreamcast got the ball rolling with Phantasy Star Online, and I remember playing Choo Choo Rocket over the early internet back in the day, but it was primitive, comparatively. Most people had dial-up at that point, and so it wasn't really viable. Xbox Live, on the other hand, released at the right time and was as majestic as it was revelatory. Classics like Unreal Tournament paved the way so Halo 2 could shine, creating one of the best online multiplayers of all time, with matchmaking making PC look like a relic of a bygone era. The inclusion of microphones as standard was also a stroke of genius, encouraging players to engage with one another and small communities to be built on lesser known games. It felt special, communal, vibrant and full of life, and honestly, I hate to be that guy, but you just had to be there. It was a magical time and many friendships were made and abusive tirades thrown, like the time I stayed up to 7 AM arguing with an American in a private chat, having given him a whooping in Halo 2 as to whether the state of Oklahoma could take Ireland in a fight. These types of experiences, money simply can't buy. Modern Warfare 2 gets a lot of credit for its raucous lobbies, but Halo 2 lobbies were wild. Proximity chat, parties, voice messages, after lobby comms. It was almost like it was designed to get players amped up and shit-talking their opponents, and boy, did we shit-talk. But that's a story for another day. Xbox Live was a melting pot of nationalities and cultures, and every game had its own community. Conquer Live and Reloaded had an incredible multiplayer that was unique and memorable, but is practically forgotten these days. And I still maintain that Outrun 2 had the friendliest and best community of any game I've ever played. And none of the competition were doing this, with Sony offering very few online titles and Nintendo making the tragic backstep of focusing on local multiplayer gaming and peripheral connectivity rather than taking that great leap online. The PS2 for me is the absolute greatest of all time, no doubt about it, but being on Xbox at that time was such a unique experience. It was like you were at the forefront of a technological revolution, and you knew it. Then came the Xbox 360. To say the Xbox 360 landed with a thud would be an understatement. Its arrival heralded a seismic shift in the console hierarchy. Having absolutely dropped the ball at its E3 2006 press conference by announcing the PS3 at $499 and $599 respectively, Sony were in disarray. And worse, there was a certain hubris to them, doubling down rather than admitting they made a faux pas. They've forgotten that the main appeal of the PS2, besides its huge, incredible, diverse library of games, was its accessibility. Retailing at $299 with a DVD player included, making it the must-have system of its day. But having dominated 2 generations straight, Sony were too busy counting coppers in their ivory tower rather than preparing for the imminent threat that was the Xbox 360. And Microsoft capitalized, getting out the door early and bringing games like Gears of War, Crackdown, and Project Gotham Racing 3 out early, and securing limited time exclusivity on classics like BioShock, Mass Effect, and The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, as well as wrestling GTA 4 exclusivity from Sony's hands. The likes of Shane Kim, Robbie Back, and Peter Moore should be commended in how they fought with a Goliath and in many ways won, making bold decisions that made the 360 simply irresistible to, well, just about everyone really. It wasn't just the games either. Its UI was ahead of the time and only got better. Its focus on Xbox Live Arcade again felt like you were witnessing a technical revolution. Achievements, for better or worse, became the de facto standard across all platforms, and the ID program kickstarted an entire indie movement. And that's not even talking about the evolutions in Xbox Live. Rather than only a handful of games having active communities like on the original Xbox, it seemed that every game on the 360 was hiving with players. And while the cultural zeitgeist went from Gears of War to Halo 3 to Call of Duty, with Battlefield hot on its tail, achievements motivated players to play games they mightn't have otherwise played for that sweet, sweet gamer score, creating organic communities in the process. I'm generally not one for nostalgia, but there are certain time periods I look back on with the fondest of memories, and the 360 was one of those times. It broke the mold, and I have so many great memories of playing games, both single and multiplayer, and getting so invested even when they weren't the best of games, because I really felt like this console was something special. It had a certain je ne sais quoi about it, and quite frankly, we didn't know how good we had it. And apparently neither did Microsoft, because as much good grace as they had garnered, somehow they managed to squander it all in a single generation, and honestly, even all these years later, I still can't understand how Don Mattrick and Xbox fumbled the ball so badly. The Xbox One got off to a rocky start when it was reported that it would always require an internet connection, that the 360 library wouldn't be backwards compatible, and that second-hand players would need to pay a fee to play the games they rightfully purchased. It was anti-consumer, essentially. Worse still, like Sony before them, Microsoft doubled down on these restrictive requirements, with Mattrick stating to critics that,
"Fortunately, we have a product for people who aren't able to get some form of connectivity. It's called Xbox 360.
Right. So stick with 360. That's your message if you don't,
Well,
if you don't like it?
if you have zero access to the internet, that is an offline device."
further fanning the flames of an already insidious animosity amongst its user base. Even by Sony standards, the vanity on display here was staggering. And knowing what we know about Mattrick now, that he commuted to Microsoft headquarters in Redmond via private jet, perhaps not that surprising. But first, a little history on Mattrick. He founded Distinctive Software in 1982, a developer mostly known for porting classics like Castlevania, Altered Beast, and Metal Gear to systems like Amiga, C64, and DOS, who were subsequently bought out by EA for $10 million in 1991. Mattrick then worked in leadership roles within EA, having a very successful tenure, before being asked, post-retirement from EA, by Robbie Back to join Microsoft, where he served as vice president overseeing Xbox 360 and PC. And during this period he no doubt had success. He helped steer the Xbox 360 during its halcyon days, but in a nakedly cynical attempt to capitalise on the success of the Nintendo Wii, he went all in on Kinect, and while this undoubtedly yielded a ton of success for Microsoft, selling 35 million units and creating top sellers like Kinect Adventures, he didn't learn a valuable lesson, that success comes with a price. You see, while the Wii absolutely trounced the competition during that generation, it sold to the wrong audience. Families playing Wii Sports every year rather than gamers buying dozens and dozens of games for their systems of choice. By not having games that appeal to the, dare I say it, hardcore, the system suffered. And if Mattrick had the prescience, he would have realised that this was the wrong path to go down long before he went down it. There's a reason Nintendo pivoted so quickly to the Wii U, even if it turned out to be a colossal mistake. It was a gimmick, a fad, and it had a sell-by date. So when Xbox One also went all in on Kinect, showcasing demos like Project Milo and Rise, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. Instead of appealing to the audience that helped make the 360 what it was, Mattrick and Microsoft tried to court the mainstream, while simultaneously abandoning its core player base. The blame can't solely be shouldered by Mattrick alone, but ask yourself this: if Peter Moore was still at the helm, do you think this would have happened? He was a corporate, a suit, a man that had become obscenely rich in his teens, out of touch, and whose only goal was to make already rich shareholders even richer. Some ideas were ahead of their time. The idea of using devices to access entertainment apps via your device has become the norm, but it's not a selling point, and it's certainly not what jaded gamers want to hear when shelling out $4.99 for a new system. The price point was another bone of contention. Most systems launch at around $500 now, but back then it was considered a lot of money for a frivolous purchase. There's a reason Sony's $299 announcement at E3 1995 is called the price heard round the world.
$299.
This stuff matters, and so console manufacturers really needed to justify what you were getting to spend that type of money, and Microsoft did far from justify it. It was a comms nightmare, a huge misstep, the reverberations of which are still felt to this very day. And Sony, sensing blood in the water, went for the jugular, focusing almost entirely on games and mocking Microsoft with its tagline, "This is for the players," and its announcement of Bungie's first non-Xbox exclusive post-Halo, Destiny. Realising the mistakes of the PS3, Mark Cerny developed the PS4 specifically to be developer-friendly, moving from the complex Cell processor to the far more common x86 chip. By working as both the PS4 lead designer and as a consultant, he was granted more flexibility to move between groups and really made the PS4 congruent in all aspects of design and performance. Sony weren't messing around, and it paid off in dividends. By going for a back-to-basics approach and focusing on making great games rather than trying to be all things to all people, they were able to outmaneuver Microsoft. People saw through what Mattrick and Xbox were going for, trying to phase out the second-hand market to make gamers pay premium prices firsthand, and using an online connection to ensure this was rigidly upheld at all times. Those of us old enough to remember know it was already going this way with the so-called Project $10. And if there's one silver lining from this whole fiasco, it's that EA dropped Project $10 right before the Xbox One announcement, clearly hoping to capitalise on this online-only system and make themselves look less like the bad guy, only for Microsoft to later walk it back, leaving their cynical ploy in tatters. Those complaining about potentially losing connection and thus access to games and apps were treated with ambivalence and borderline contempt by Mattrick, who talked about how, if you were in a nuclear submarine, you mightn't have internet, but most places have it. The problem and major oversight being that internet isn't always reliable everywhere in the world, least of all America, so being at the mercy of your ISP wasn't exactly a promising predicament. Attempting to eradicate the second-hand market was also a blunderous call. Games are expensive, and second-hand is often the only reliable way for people to build collections, so trying to inorganically sound its death knell was a prospect most were unwilling to abide. It was naked and rampant greed, pure and simple, and people saw through it. Sony, with ruthless efficiency and precision, announced at E3 2013 that the PS4 would not only support used games, but that
when a gamer buys a PS4 disc,
They have the rights to use that copy of the game. They can trade in the game at retail, sell it to another person, lend it to a friend, or keep it forever.
To a rapturous response. Compare this with statements like that by Xbox creative strategist Adam Orth saying, "Sorry, I don't get the drama around having an always-on console. Every device now is always on. That's the world we live in. Hashtag deal with it." Or like Mattrick saying, when interviewed by the Wall Street Journal, that only 5% of customers play older games on a new console, and that if you're backwards compatible, you're really backwards.
You talking to me? You talking to me? You talking to me? Well, then who the hell else are you talking? Talking to me?
And you can see why the PS4 was so successful by comparison. Winning an optics battle with this version of Xbox leadership was as easy as making a 21-second used game instructional video.
This is how you share your games on PS4.
Thanks.
PlayStation.
And the worst part of all this is that, as expected, it was all walked back. Used games could now be played on the system, Kinect wasn't bundled as standard, which brought the price down, and online only was shelved. For the time being. Mattrick, having left Xbox bloodied and bruised from his ill-fated out-of-touch gambles, abruptly walked in July 2013, moving over to Zynga as CEO and leaving Xbox rudderless in his wake, with damage done that was so deep and so lasting that it reminds me of the famous former Apple CEO Gil Amelio quote, "Apple is like a ship with a hole in the bottom. My job is to steer it." Xbox was now a poisoned chalice. You see, unlike Sony, Xbox hadn't asserted its dominance or built up the necessary goodwill across 2 generations like they had. The 360, while leading for most of its generation, was eventually outsold by the PS3, and the RROD cost the company over $1 billion in repairs, meaning that while it was unequivocally a success, in many ways it was a Pyrrhic victory. Phil Spencer was left with the thankless task of restoring brand advocacy, and it was an uphill battle. Xbox made it a priority to focus on backwards compatibility, a gargantuan task in itself, given the Xbox One architecture wasn't designed with this in mind. At E3 2015, Spencer made the announcement with aplomb and was greeted appropriately.
Last year, the team decided to tackle a feature that has been consistently at the top of your request list. And while we weren't sure it was possible, today, I'm pleased to announce Xbox One backward compatibility.
But it was 2 years too late. This is stuff that should have been prioritized in the early stages of hardware development, but it was a major oversight, with the company prioritizing gimmicky peripherals and using your Xbox as an entertainment device rather than the things that mattered. We've been seeing the same games ported over to every system imaginable for Eternia, but with digital licensing, there's no reason why these couldn't carry across if the right measures were put in place. No reason other than greed, that is. Microsoft's entire business model was reliant upon getting consumers to pay for new iterations of already existing software. Windows, Office, Excel, and the wider 365 suite. It goes on, and this is why backwards compatibility was never a focus. It was a case of on to the next one and repeat the same model. But with the wider switch to as a service subscription models, with the likes of Office 365 and Azure doing gangbusters in their commercial space, it made sense to try to replicate that with Xbox, and that's exactly what they did with Xbox Game Pass. I don't personally have Game Pass, given that I have an obscene amount of Xbox games, and I don't like time limits, but I appreciate the idea and the value. It's a no-brainer for Xbox owners, and as with all subscription services, they hook you into the ecosystem with scandalous introductory offers, and then slowly but surely up the prices when they know you're unlikely to switch. It's the current zeitgeist with tech companies, and it shows no signs of slowing down. But Game Pass is different. In 2020, Microsoft gleefully announced that Game Pass had passed 10 million subscribers, then upped this to 15 million, later confirming a total of 25 million in 2022. But then things went suspiciously quiet after that, and you know what it means when companies stop reporting numbers.
34 million Game Pass members.
So we made the decision that we're going to take 4 games to the other consoles.
Give the players choice and what they want to do and who they play with.
A 1-2 hit of a pandemic boost confiscating growth numbers and a current cost of living crisis, plus plenty of other digital storefronts catering to the masses with delectable deals, meant that Game Pass didn't grow in the way Microsoft expected. It's hard to justify paying for a gaming subscription service when you already have big back catalogs, as most people have. It's a fantastic service, but not an essential service, and, but frankly, the Xbox install base is too small to deliver the growth needed to justify the expenditure invested. In terms of basic ROI, Microsoft are cooked. And this doesn't leave a lot of options because you know what they say. Once the prices go up, they never come back down, making Game Pass a hard justification for the foreseeable. Microsoft can either somehow reverse their decades-long lagging sales through releasing some type of must-have system a la the PS2 in the early 2000s, or they'll go third-party. I personally can't see the Xbox going away anytime soon, particularly all digital models like the S, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if it did. They aren't a hardware manufacturer. With the exception of Surface, most of their hardware products failed to launch, and so is being perpetually stuck behind the market leaders a place Microsoft can withstand in perpetuity? I don't think so. Something has to give. They're a ruthlessly competitive and Machiavellian organisation, so don't for a second think they're the good guys because they're putting games on other systems. They're doing it out of necessity and in all likelihood as part of a wider pivot to third-party publishing. Looking back at Xbox and what it achieved, it's hard to deny it didn't push the industry forward in so many ways. And in ways, it's sad to see what it has become. A hollow husk of a once great Goliath. I'll never forget all the memories and friends I made through the system and what it meant to me at the time. And sure, you can still do a lot of what we did back then on PC, but it's not the same. A lot of people forget that Xbox Live wasn't just about playing in your living room, it was also about those couch experiences you had in team doubles on Halo 3, or playing co-op in Rainbow Six Vegas, or Army of Two. It was a great time. A special time. I don't know what the future holds for the brand or console gaming at large, but I'm glad I got to be a part of it.